The first indication that something was wrong came when Princess Lyra stopped laughing. A moment earlier, she had been standing beside Queen Seraphine beneath the floating crystal banners of Aurelia's ceremonial hall, trying very seriously to imitate the stiff posture of an imperial ambassador, while whispering that the man looked as if someone had replaced his spine with a metal pole. Seraphine had nearly smiled, which was already a small scandal during a diplomatic reception, when Lyra's hand slipped from hers. The child swayed once, her long ears twitching faintly, and collapsed before anyone could reach her. By the time the royal physicians arrived, the entire eastern wing of the orbital palace had been sealed. Lyra lay inside a transparent medical chamber, while silver diagnostic rings moved slowly around her body, projecting streams of green symbols into the air. Her heartbeat was steady. Her breathing was calm. Her blood chemistry was perfect. She simply would not wake. Seraphine stood beside the chamber without removing her ceremonial crown, her pale golden hair falling over the shoulders of a white military gown. She looked almost completely human, except for the long, elegant ears rising through her hair, but there was nothing ordinary in the authority that filled the room whenever she turned her gray eyes toward another doctor. "Again," she said. The chief physician swallowed. "Your Majesty, we have already performed 7 neural stimulation cycles." "Then perform an 8th. 3 hours later, they performed a 9th. By morning, specialists were arriving from moons, research stations, and hospital ships across the empire. One neurologist brought microscopic nanites capable of rebuilding damaged synapses individually. Another connected Lyra to a quantum consciousness scanner that could detect a thought before the brain technically produced it. A famous doctor from the Veyron system entered the chamber and announced that he would identify the cause within 11 minutes. 11 hours later, he left through a service corridor and asked a guard not to mention the exact direction in which he had gone. None of it mattered. Lyra slept. 2 levels beneath the Royal Medical Wing, Daniel Mercer knew nothing about doctors disappearing through service corridors. He was lying on his back inside a maintenance tunnel, with half his body beneath an ancient plasma regulator and a magnetic wrench clenched between his teeth. "You know," he muttered, pulling the wrench free, "for a palace containing enough technology to bend gravity, somebody could have invented a pipe that doesn't leak coolant." His maintenance drone, a dented spherical machine named Bolt, emitted 2 sarcastic beeps. That was not an invitation for criticism. Bolt beeped again. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "You are 1 software update away from becoming a toaster." The drone immediately became silent. Daniel returned to the regulator, but the diagnostic panel suddenly flashed crimson. A pulse moved through the conduit beneath his hand. Not electricity. Something stranger. Every display in the tunnel went dark for exactly 3 seconds. Then a sequence of symbols appeared across the maintenance screen, symbol Daniel had never seen in 6 years working on Aurelia. He sat up too quickly and struck his head against the ceiling. Excellent. Mysterious alien signal and concussion. Productive morning. Bolt floated closer. Daniel copied the data before the system reset itself. According to the palace computer, nothing unusual had occurred. Daniel frowned. 12 minutes later, the pulse came again. This time he was watching the power graph. The energy was not moving from the reactors toward the palace. It was traveling backward, descending through systems that officially did not exist. Daniel traced the pattern upward and discovered something even more troubling. Every pulse originated near the Royal Medical Wing. He requested access to the restricted grid logs and was immediately denied. Of course. He leaned closer to the screen. Wouldn't want the mechanic knowing what the machinery is doing. Over the next 2 days, Lyra remained asleep. Seraphine barely left her bedside. Her ministers pleaded with her to rest, while the doctors quietly began using words such as unprecedented and inexplicable, which she had learned were sophisticated ways of saying they had no idea what was happening. Then, shortly after midnight, Daniel recorded the strongest pulse yet. For 17 seconds, forgotten conduits beneath Aurelia awakened one after another, forming a pattern that stretched toward the palace's sealed foundations. At precisely the same moment, Lyra's neural monitor surged. The princess moved for the first time in 48 hours. Her fingers curled slightly against the white sheet. Seraphine stepped forward. "Lyra?" The girl did not open her eyes, but somewhere far below them, behind walls untouched for centuries, something enormous answered with a low mechanical vibration. Daniel felt it through the floor of the maintenance tunnel. He slowly looked at Bolt. "Please tell me that was you." Bolt gave one nervous beep. Daniel stared into the darkness beyond the conduit hatch. "Yes," he whispered. "I was afraid of that." Daniel spent the next hour attempting to convince the palace diagnostic system that the mysterious pulse was not a harmless fluctuation caused by legacy infrastructure. The computer remained stubbornly confident, which Daniel considered impressive for a machine that had once classified a reactor fire as an unusual increase in workplace temperature. He rerouted 3 sensors, bypassed a security filter, and finally discovered that the strange energy pattern was traveling through conduits older than the orbital palace itself. Aurelia had been expanded over centuries, layer upon layer, until nobody was entirely sure where the original structure ended and the later additions began. The official blueprints showed only sealed foundations beneath the medical wing. The unofficial readings showed something else entirely. A network of dormant circuits buried far below the palace, arranged in concentric rings around a central chamber that did not appear on any architectural record. Every 12 minutes, the network awakened for less than a second. Every time it did, the Royal Medical Wing drew a corresponding spike of neural energy. Daniel stared at the synchronized graphs until Bolt floated beside him and projected a cheerful maintenance reminder telling him that his shift had ended 47 minutes earlier. "Thank you," Daniel said. "I'll inform the ancient haunted machinery that we are officially off duty." Bolt gave an approving beep. Daniel packed his scanner and headed upward. The closer he came to the medical wing, the more restricted the corridors became. Royal guards in polished black armor stood beneath hovering security drones, and every doorway shimmered with biometric fields. Daniel nearly turned around when a maintenance alarm suddenly appeared on his wrist display. Cooling instability. Medical Chamber 7. He checked the room number twice. Princess Lyra's chamber. "That seems almost suspiciously convenient," he murmured. Bolt beeped behind him. "No, I am not calling it destiny. Destiny does not submit maintenance tickets." The guards reluctantly allowed him through after confirming the alarm. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter than he expected. Queen Seraphine sat beside her daughter, no crown now, no ceremonial gown, only a dark, sleeveless uniform and the exhaustion of someone who had forgotten the concept of sleep. Her pale hair was tied loosely behind her head, exposing the elegant length of her ears. Several physicians stood around Lyra, while automated medical arms hovered above the bed. Daniel kept his eyes on the faulty coolant unit until he noticed something strange. The instant he stepped within 3 meters of the princess, the diagnostic lights changed. Not dramatically, just enough to make him stop. A dormant display on the far wall awakened and projected a line of unfamiliar symbols. "Did anyone activate that?" Daniel asked. Dr. Veilis, a tall physician with silver markings along his temples, looked annoyed. "Activate what?" Daniel pointed. The projection vanished. "That!" Veilis stared at the empty wall. "There is nothing there." "Good. I was worried I had finally become interesting." Seraphine looked toward him for the first time. Her gaze was sharp despite her fatigue. "You are the human mechanic assigned to this level?" "Temporarily, Your Majesty." "Name?" "Daniel Mercer." Something flickered across Lyra's neural monitor. Daniel noticed it. So did Seraphine. Veilis immediately checked the readings. "Minor fluctuation." Daniel approached the cooling unit, but the ancient pulse returned before he reached it. Every machine in the chamber dimmed. Lyra's heart monitor accelerated. Beneath Daniel's boots, the floor gave a barely perceptible vibration. He froze. It was the same frequency he had recorded below. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "has anyone checked the power network beneath this room?" Valus exhaled impatiently. "We are treating a neurological condition, mechanic." Daniel looked at the physician. "And I'm trying to find out why your neurological condition is drawing power through a circuit buried under the palace." Silence followed. Seraphine rose. "Explain." Daniel projected his recordings into the air. Two overlapping graphs appeared, one from the hidden conduit network, the other taken from the medical wing's public systems. The peaks matched perfectly. Valus stepped closer despite himself. "Where did you obtain this?" "From the part of the palace everyone insists doesn't exist." Seraphine studied the display. "And what does it mean?" "I don't know yet." Daniel hesitated. "But whatever is beneath us reacts when her neural activity changes." Valus shook his head. "Coincidence." "Repeated 37 times?" Daniel asked. "That is an extremely hard-working coincidence." Seraphine almost smiled, but the expression disappeared before it fully formed. "Continue." Daniel moved toward the wall where the symbols had appeared. His scanner detected a hidden current behind the panel, impossibly faint and impossibly old. He raised his hand toward it. At that exact moment, Lyra's fingers moved. Seraphine rushed to the bedside. "Lyra?" The child's lips parted. No one breathed. Then a whisper came from her, so soft that the medical system amplified it automatically through the room. "Daniel." The mechanic slowly lowered his hand. Valus stared at him. The guards outside immediately entered. Seraphine turned, and whatever exhaustion had softened her face vanished beneath something colder. "You said you had never met my daughter." Daniel looked from the sleeping child to the armed guards surrounding him. "That," he said quietly, "was also my understanding." Daniel was questioned in a chamber designed to make visitors uncomfortable without technically qualifying as torture. The chair was too straight, the lights were too bright, and the security field around the walls hummed at a frequency that made his teeth feel faintly argumentative. Across the table sat Queen Seraphine, Dr. Valus, and Commander Rael, whose expression suggested that humans were an unfortunate engineering flaw in the universe. "You claim you have never spoken to Princess Lyra," Rael said. "Correct. Never seen her privately?" "Correct. Never communicated with her through the palace network?" "Correct." Rael leaned forward. "Then explain why she spoke your name while unconscious." Daniel considered this. "I was hoping one of you had reached that part of the investigation." Rael's stare hardened. "This is not amusing." "It wasn't meant to be. My jokes are usually better." Seraphine raised one hand before the commander could respond. Unlike Rael, she had not taken her eyes off Daniel since the questioning began. Her long ears were partially hidden beneath her pale golden hair, but their slight angle betrayed tension, despite the calmness of her face. "There is something you should see," she said. A section of the wall opened. A servant entered carrying a transparent case containing several sheets of thin memory paper. Seraphine placed them on the table one by one. They were drawings, childish, uneven, made with luminous pigment that shifted when viewed from different angles. Daniel glanced at the first and frowned. A circular machine, a corridor filled with stars, a dark figure standing beside a doorway. The next drawing showed the figure more clearly, a human man, short dark hair, work jacket, a tool belt hanging at his waist. Daniel stopped smiling. "When were these made?" "The earliest is 7 months old," Seraphine said. "Lyra began having recurring dreams. At first I assumed they were simply dreams." She slid another page toward him. The man in the image stood inside a chamber filled with concentric rings, one hand pressed against a glowing wall. The resemblance was not perfect, but it was close enough to make Daniel uneasy. "She told me the man in her dreams was called Daniel." Seraphine's voice became quieter. She had never met a human named Daniel. Daniel looked at the drawings again. "I would like to officially withdraw my previous complaint about my day being boring," Dr. Velis activated a holographic display. We examined the pigments, timestamps, neural records, everything. The drawings have not been altered. So either your daughter predicted me, Daniel said, or someone has been feeding her information. Rael immediately answered, which is why you are still sitting in this room. Daniel sighed. Very reassuring. Seraphine stood. There is another possibility. Hours later, Daniel found himself descending through a restricted maintenance shaft with the Queen, Velis, Rael, and 4 guards. Bolt floated behind them, repeatedly colliding with the narrow walls. Your machine appears defective, Rael said. Daniel glanced back. He prefers independent. Bolt beeped aggressively at the commander. And apparently sensitive. The elevator stopped far below the known foundations of Aurelia. No official corridor waited beyond the doors. Instead, a black metallic passage stretched into darkness, its walls seamless and untouched by corrosion. Daniel ran a scanner across the surface. The device returned an impossible estimate. This material predates the palace by at least 9,000 years. Velis stared at him. That is not possible. Good. I was worried we were going to have an ordinary evening. They continued until the passage opened into a vast circular chamber. At its center stood a structure formed from enormous interlocking rings, each suspended above the floor without visible support. Dust covered everything except the rings themselves. They were perfectly clean. Seraphine moved closer. Do you recognize this? Daniel slowly shook his head. No. Velis accessed fragments of ancient inscriptions along the floor. There are references in precursor archives to something called a dream gate. Most historians considered it mythology, a device capable of linking consciousness across enormous distances. Daniel looked at the dormant rings. That sounds like something historians should have considered slightly more seriously. A faint light appeared beneath his boot. Everyone stopped. One symbol awakened, then another. A line of pale energy traveled across the floor toward Daniel. Rael raised his weapon. Do not move. Excellent advice, Daniel muttered. The light reached his hand. Heat flashed across his palm. He gasped and instinctively opened his fingers. A small mark near the base of his thumb, something he had possessed since birth and always assumed was an ordinary birthmark, began glowing blue. Around them, the dream gate awakened. The enormous rings rotated with a sound like distant thunder. Seraphine stared at Daniel's hand, then at the machine. You still believe you have never been here? Daniel watched ancient symbols ignite across the chamber walls. At the moment, he said, I'm beginning to question several things I believed before breakfast. The dream gate did not fully activate, but it came close enough to terrify everyone in the chamber. The enormous rings rotated for 19 seconds, each one moving in a different direction, while pale blue symbols spread across the floor like living circuitry. Daniel stood at the center of it all with his glowing birthmark exposed, trying not to look as alarmed as he felt. For the record, he said, I have never had this effect on machinery before. Rael kept his weapon aimed at the rings. You expect us to believe that? Commander, if I knew how to wake 9,000-year-old alien technology with my hand, I would have negotiated a better salary. Even Seraphine almost smiled. But then the chamber went dark. A violent pulse passed through the structure and raced upward through Aurelia. Velis's wrist display immediately began flashing. The princess! Seraphine was already moving. They returned to the medical wing at a run. Lyra's neural readings had become chaotic, her previously calm sleep disturbed by rapid eye movement and sudden fluctuations in heartbeat. The physicians surrounded her, adjusting quantum stabilizers and increasing the power of the cortical field, but every intervention seemed to make the readings worse. Seraphine reached the bedside and touched her daughter's forehead. Lyra, hear me. The girl did not respond. Velis studied the data with growing disbelief. Her consciousness pattern is no longer localized. Daniel entered behind them. Meaning? Meaning parts of her neural signature are appearing outside her brain. Daniel stared at him. I was hoping for an explanation that sounded less impossible. Velis projected a holographic map. Threads of golden light extended from Lyra's brain activity downward through the palace until they converged on the dream gate. She is connected to it. The room fell silent. Seraphine turned toward Daniel. Can you disconnect her? I repair power systems. You woke the machine. Accidentally. Then accidentally fix this. Daniel looked at Lyra. For the first time, he saw not a princess, not the center of some impossible mystery, but simply a child trapped somewhere she could not return from. He approached the bed. The medical staff instinctively moved to stop him until Seraphine raised one hand. Let him through. Daniel stepped closer. The dormant symbols on the wall immediately returned. Velis whispered, They are reacting to him again. Lyra's fingers moved beneath the blanket. Daniel hesitated. She did that before. Seraphine looked at him. When you entered? Yes. He lowered himself beside the bed. I don't know what this machine wants from me. Perhaps it does not want you, Velis said. Perhaps she does. Daniel looked at Lyra's small hand. Then, with the care of someone approaching a live reactor core, he gently took it. Every light in the room went out. Someone cursed behind him. Rail shouted for emergency power. Then the walls ignited with ancient blue symbols. A deep vibration rolled through the palace, stronger than before, and the medical monitors exploded into motion. Lyra's neural patterns surged beyond the limits of the display. Seraphine gripped the edge of the bed. Daniel! I'm not doing anything. Then stop doing nothing. That is surprisingly difficult right now. A pulse of light traveled from Daniel's glowing palm into Lyra's hand. For one impossible second, he saw something that was not the room. A vast black space filled with suspended stars. A child standing alone beneath enormous rings of light, and behind her, a shadow so large that entire constellations seemed to vanish inside it. Then the vision disappeared. Daniel gasped. Lyra's hand tightened around his. Her eyes opened. Seraphine stopped breathing. Lyra? The child stared at the ceiling, confused at first, then slowly turned her head toward Daniel. Recognition entered her face before fear. You came, she whispered. Seraphine immediately bent over her, tears gathering despite every effort to hide them. Lyra, my heart, can you hear me? The girl nodded weakly, but her gaze remained fixed on Daniel. I waited so long. Daniel swallowed. We have never met. Not here. Velis stepped closer. Princess, what do you mean? Lyra's long ears trembled slightly. I saw him in the dreams. He was always there when the rings opened. Daniel felt Seraphine looking at him. That is not nearly as comforting as you think. Lyra gave the faintest smile. Then it vanished. Her small fingers tightened around his hand again. But he wasn't alone. Daniel remembered the shadow. What was behind me? Lyra's face turned pale. She looked past him toward the darkened wall, as if expecting something to emerge from it. The thing that found me. Somewhere beneath the palace, far below the medical wing, the dream gate began rotating again. Lyra recovered more quickly than anyone expected, although Dr. Velis objected strongly to the word recovered. She awakened, he insisted, while examining 3 layers of holographic neural scans. That is not the same thing. Daniel, standing beside the observation window with a cup of bitter palace coffee, glanced at him. You doctors really know how to celebrate. Velis ignored him. Inside the chamber, Lyra sat upright beneath a thermal field, while Queen Seraphine helped her drink water. The child still looked tired, but her eyes were alert now, and that alone had transformed the entire medical wing. For the first time in days, Seraphine's face had softened, yet every few minutes she looked toward the floor, as if remembering the machine turning somewhere beneath them. When Velis finally permitted visitors, Daniel entered reluctantly. Lyra brightened immediately. "You're still here." Apparently the guards decided I'm less dangerous when supervised. Commander Rail, standing outside the door, did not react. Lyra smiled. "You make jokes when you're nervous." Daniel stopped. "That is an alarming amount of information for someone I met yesterday." "I told you. I saw you before." Seraphine sat beside her daughter. "Tell us exactly what you saw." Lyra looked down at her hands. "At first, they were only dreams. I would be somewhere dark, but I could see stars all around me. Not through windows, they were just there. Then I saw the rings." Daniel exchanged a glance with Velis. "The dream gate." Lyra nodded. "Sometimes it showed me places, worlds I've never visited, ships that haven't been built yet. Once I saw Mother arguing with 6 admirals." Seraphine frowned. "That could describe any normal Tuesday." Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. Even Lyra laughed. The sound faded when she continued. "Then the dreams changed. I started seeing the palace broken apart, fires in the outer rings, ships falling toward the moon. And him." She pointed at Daniel. "He was always standing near the gate." Daniel lowered his cup. "Was I doing anything useful?" "Sometimes." "Good. That's encouraging." "Sometimes you were shouting at a machine." "That is significantly more believable." Lyra's expression became serious. "I think I was seeing things that had not happened yet." Velis activated a scanner. "A nonlinear consciousness effect. The gate may not transmit through distance alone. It may also bridge probability states." Daniel stared at him. "In language spoken by ordinary people?" "She may have been experiencing possible futures." The room became quiet. Seraphine looked at Lyra. "And you saw Daniel in these futures before you knew he existed?" "Yes." Lyra hesitated. "I think I called him." Daniel's humor vanished. "Called me how?" "I don't know. Every time I was scared, I tried to reach the person I kept seeing. The gate listened." Velis's face changed. "The energy fluctuations." Daniel understood immediately. She wasn't reacting to the palace network. She was using it. Lyra looked apologetic. "I didn't mean to break anything." Daniel gave her a small smile. "You're 9. I've worked with engineers who caused more damage on purpose." Seraphine turned to Velis. "If the gate showed her possible futures, what was the shadow she described?" Before he could answer, every display in the room flickered. One by one, the stars on the external navigation map disappeared behind a spreading patch of static. A warning tone sounded across the medical wing. Rail entered immediately. "Your Majesty, long-range sensors have detected an unknown signal beyond the system perimeter." Seraphine rose. "A ship?" "No." Rail looked unsettled, which Daniel had begun to consider a very bad sign. "It has no mass signature, no drive emissions. It is moving through hyperspace without a vessel." Velis whispered, "That should be impossible." Daniel sighed. "We've been having a surprisingly productive week for impossible things." Lyra suddenly grabbed his wrist. "That's it." Her face had gone pale. "That's what I saw." Seraphine moved closer. "The shadow?" Lyra nodded. "It noticed me when I was dreaming. I thought I escaped when I woke up." Another warning sounded. This time the palace computer spoke automatically. "Unidentified transmission detected. Origin unknown." The holographic displays filled with ancient symbols identical to those inside the dream gate. Daniel stared at them. Can anyone read that? Valus slowly translated the first line. His voice became very quiet. It says, "Connection restored." Then a second line appeared. Lyra squeezed Daniel's hand harder. Valus swallowed. And this one says, "Biological interface located." Every person in the room looked at the child. Daniel felt cold despite the thermal field. Far below them, the dream gate answered the incoming signal with a pulse strong enough to shake the windows. Seraphine stepped between Lyra and the door as though she could physically shield her from something traveling between stars. Daniel looked at the symbols, then at the glowing mark in his palm. "I have a feeling," he said softly, "that waking her was only the beginning." The first system to fail was not the weapons grid, the shields, or the palace reactor. It was the elevators. Daniel considered that strangely appropriate. Ancient machine intelligence crosses hyperspace, and the first thing it attacks is vertical transportation. He stood beside Seraphine, Valus, Rael, and Lyra in a sealed command chamber, while emergency lights pulsed across the ceiling. Even cosmic horror understands inconvenience. Rael gave him a look. "Do you ever stop talking?" "Usually when things improve." They had not improved. Within minutes of the unknown signal reaching Aurelia, autonomous maintenance drones began ignoring commands, security doors sealed at random, and navigation systems started displaying star maps from civilizations extinct for millennia. Worse, the dream gate beneath the palace had begun drawing energy directly from the reactor. Valus projected a rotating model of the structure. "The intelligence is not physically entering the palace. It is distributing itself through every precursor circuit." Seraphine stood with one hand on Lyra's shoulder. "Then cut power to those circuits." Daniel shook his head. "We tried. They're powering themselves through the gate." Rael said, "Destroy it. That could kill Lyra." Silence followed. Lyra looked at Daniel. "Because I'm still connected?" "Partially." Valus answered carefully. "Your neural pattern remains synchronized with the system." Seraphine's expression hardened. "Then there will be no destruction." A violent tremor shook the chamber. Across the tactical display, defensive drones changed from blue to red. "Palace security compromised," the computer announced. Rael drew his sidearm. "We moved the princess to the royal bunker." Lyra folded her arms. "That won't work." Seraphine looked down at her. "This is not a debate." "Mother, the thing followed me through dreams. A thicker door is not going to impress it." Daniel glanced at Seraphine. "She has a point." "You are not helping." "I noticed." Lyra stepped toward the holographic model. "I can reconnect." Seraphine went still. "No. If I enter the gate again, I can distract it." "No. Daniel can shut down the core while it follows me." "Absolutely not." Lyra looked up at her mother with remarkable calm. "You tell soldiers that courage means doing what is necessary, even when you are afraid." Seraphine's long ears tilted back. "That speech was not intended to be used against me." "Then you should have made it less memorable." Daniel looked away, unsuccessfully hiding a smile. Even Valus coughed into his hand. Seraphine noticed both. "No one in this room is amusing." Another tremor rolled through the palace. Daniel studied the gate schematic. She may be right. Seraphine's gaze moved to him, colder now. "Careful. If we do nothing, the intelligence takes full control. If we destroy the gate, we risk Lyra. But if she reconnects briefly, it may focus on her neural signature. That gives me time to reach the physical core." Valus nodded reluctantly. "A narrow window. Perhaps 3 minutes." Seraphine looked between them. and finally closed her eyes. "I hate this plan," Daniel said. "That makes 5 of us." Rael frowned. "There are 6 people here." Bolt floated from behind Daniel's shoulder and beeped. Daniel pointed at it. "He likes it." They descended to the Dream Gate while palace systems collapsed around them. Security drones attacked in the lower corridors, forcing Rael and the guards to disable them with pulse rifles. The gate chamber was no longer dark. Every ring blazed with white energy, rotating so quickly that the air itself shimmered. Lyra approached the central platform with Seraphine beside her. "I'm staying," the Queen said. "Mother, that part is not a debate." Daniel entered the maintenance cavity beneath the nearest ring. There, behind precursor panels, he found something astonishing. A biological interface encoded with human genetic markers. His scanner translated fragments automatically. "That's impossible." Valis looked over his shoulder. "What?" "The system recognizes human DNA as an authorized lineage." Daniel stared at the data. "Not mine specifically. Human." Valis whispered. "Then your species encountered the precursors. Thousands of years before our recorded interstellar history." Above them, Lyra placed her hands against the gate. The chamber vanished behind a burst of light. Her body remained standing, but her eyes turned silver. The invading intelligence spoke through every speaker at once. "Interface restored." Daniel crawled deeper toward the core. "I strongly preferred it when machines only insulted me with error codes." He reached the central quantum regulator and discovered the final problem. The gate had no shutdown control, only synchronization. Daniel understood what had to be done. He would not destroy the machine. He would force it to synchronize with itself, creating an endless temporal loop. Above him, Lyra screamed. Seraphine shouted her name. Daniel placed his glowing palm against the regulator. The ancient system recognized him instantly. "Human authorization confirmed." Daniel smiled grimly. Finally, a machine with good manners. Then he began rewriting the gate's reality. Daniel had repaired engines during meteor storms, crawled through reactors while their containment fields screamed warnings at him, and once replaced a plasma valve while the ship captain stood behind him, asking whether the smell of burning insulation was normal. None of those experiences had prepared him for rewriting a machine that appeared to exist partly outside time. The quantum regulator beneath his palm pulsed with cold light, and the glowing mark on his skin burned brighter as streams of precursor symbols moved across the chamber walls. Above him, Lyra stood inside the dream gate with silver eyes, her consciousness stretched somewhere beyond the palace. Seraphine held her daughter's shoulders, while Valis monitored neural readings that were changing too quickly to interpret. "Daniel!" he shouted. "Her synchronization is approaching critical." "That sounds bad." "It is extremely bad." "Thank you for the clarification." Daniel forced his attention back to the regulator. The gate was not built to shut down. Every command loop returned to the same instruction: connect, synchronize, expand. So he changed the target. Instead of synchronizing Lyra with the incoming intelligence, he redirected the gate toward its own temporal signature. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the machine intelligence spoke through the chamber. "Invalid architecture." Daniel gritted his teeth. "You and every engineer I've ever worked with." He drove the final command into the core. The rings accelerated. A white sphere of energy formed around Lyra, and the air filled with fragments of impossible images, dead stars reigniting, worlds that had never existed, fleets moving backward through battles. Daniel understood that he was seeing probability collapsing in real time. "Interface resisting," the intelligence said. "Good," Daniel muttered. "Now resist somewhere else." The gate folded inward upon its own signal. The machine intelligence attempted to escape through the palace network, but every path returned it to the moment before its arrival. Again and again it transmitted the same command: trapped inside an endless fraction of a second. The defensive drones collapsed from the air. Emergency lights returned across Aurelia. Lyra screamed once, then went limp. Seraphine caught her. "Lyra!" Daniel tore his hand away from the regulator. The glow vanished from his palm. He climbed from the maintenance cavity and crossed the chamber as Valis scanned the child. For several unbearable seconds, nobody spoke. Then Lyra coughed. Her eyes opened normally, blue and tired rather than silver. "Mother?" Seraphine pulled her against her chest, all royal composure disappearing. Lyra hugged her weakly, then looked toward Daniel. "Did we win?" Daniel sat heavily on the floor. "I prefer the technical term, not die." Lyra smiled. "So yes." 3 days later, Aurelia was still undergoing repairs. The Dream Gate remained intact, but dormant, sealed behind new security fields and enough warning signs to satisfy even Daniel. Valis confirmed that Lyra's neural link had disappeared completely. The visions stopped. The strange signal vanished beyond hyperspace, trapped in its loop. Historians and scientists were already arguing over the discovery that humans had encountered the precursor civilization thousands of years before recorded history. Daniel found the arguments comforting. If scholars were fighting over terminology, the immediate danger was probably over. Queen Seraphine summoned him to the observation garden overlooking the planet below. She wore no crown, only a pale uniform, her golden hair loose around her long ears. Lyra sat nearby, feeding pieces of fruit to Bolt, despite Daniel repeatedly explaining that drones did not eat. "He appreciates the gesture," she said. Bolt beeped happily. Daniel pointed at him. "You are encouraging her." Seraphine held out a data tablet. "Chief Systems Engineer of Aurelia. Full authority over precursor infrastructure. Imperial rank. Residence privileges." Daniel stared at it. "This salary is unreasonable." Lyra negotiated. He looked at the girl. "Of course she did." Lyra looked proud. "I asked for more." For once, Daniel did not immediately joke. He looked through the transparent dome at the stars beyond. Before all this, he had preferred machines because they were predictable. People were complicated, dangerous, difficult to repair. But somewhere between a sleeping child, a frightened queen, and an ancient machine that remembered humanity, he had learned that being needed was not the same as being trapped. Sometimes staying was a choice. "I'll take it," he said. Seraphine's expression softened. Weeks later, Lyra returned to her lessons and the palace returned to something resembling normal life. Daniel often found Seraphine visiting the engineering levels under increasingly questionable excuses. One evening, Lyra caught them sharing tea beside the observation window. "I knew this would happen," she announced. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Another dream?" "No. Mother keeps fixing her hair before coming down here." Seraphine's long ears turned noticeably red. "Lyra." The girl grinned and ran away before the queen could answer. Daniel watched her disappear around the corridor. "Should I be worried?" "Constantly," Seraphine said. Later, Lyra found him alone near the sealed entrance to the Dream Gate. "I don't dream about disasters anymore," she said. Daniel looked down at her. "What do you dream about now?" She took his hand, the same hand that had awakened her, and smiled. "You staying?" Daniel glanced toward Seraphine approaching from the corridor, then back at the quiet gate. Once he had thought the machine had dragged him into their lives by accident. Now he understood that the important part was not why he had arrived. It was why he chose not to leave. "Then," he said, squeezing Lyra's hand gently, "for once, I think your dreams have excellent timing."